Good afternoon, everyone. I hear a number of beeps still coming on, so we're going to give another minute or two for people to join in. But I do want to be respectful of everyone's time so we can get started as soon as possible, so we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. This is Leanne Candora with Human Services Research Institute. I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon after the go live on Tuesday. I believe Karen Lee Harrington, the Acting Executive Director of MHDO, is also on the call today and will be giving a short introduction in a moment. Karen Lee, are you on?
I am. Good afternoon, everybody. So, Leanne, I think we'll go ahead and get started.
Hi, this
Sounds like the beats have slowed down.
Hospital. I can't get on the webinar. When I click on the link for the calendar, it gives me the registration, and it doesn't give me the webinar.
If you copy and paste the web address from the location field in your appointment, it should launch.
So while we're giving folks a minute or so to get into the webinar, let me jump into just a brief welcome, and I'm just going to talk through, I think, maybe the first couple of slides, and then we'll get into the real heart of the discussion this afternoon. And I guess first and foremost, I just want to start with a big, huge thank you to all of you. I know the last couple of months have been very busy for you for lots of different reasons, and we've added all of this to your plate and have asked a lot from you all, and I just, again, want to thank you. I'm optimistic that all the work that we've all put into this will ultimately pay off with a more streamlined, more efficient system from your perspective in terms of submitting data, and from our perspective in terms of the data that we get in that we're then able to release to the users of the data, which just, I know many of you know this, but many of the users of the data are actually your own facilities. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we get into this. If you do have to step away from your phone, don't put us on hold, just mute the line. There is a chat feature in the webinar, so if you have questions that you want to ask, please use that function, and our goal at the end of the formal presentation is to open it up for Q&A, and we want to get to as many of those questions as we can. And if we need to schedule a follow-up, we will do that. This session really is designed to help you with the next step through this whole process, which is really understanding how to work with the validations and the override process. So with that, I think we can move to the next slide. So quickly, I want to just take a few minutes and talk to you about the testing summary from Phase 5, and then I'm going to turn it over to Leanne, and she will walk through, and there may be other members on the team that will walk through the next several items. And again, what we want to spend the most amount of time going through today is an actual demo of when you've submitted data through the portal, you know, now what? When errors arise and you need to address those. So I think next slide. So again, we went live this past Tuesday. So big congratulations to everybody. Okay, so a couple of things that I learned as we were debriefing on the final phase of testing, and again, thank you to those of you that participated in our 5 phases of testing. I really do think that that effort is hopefully going to pay off when you are all submitting your files in the live system. There were over 150 files that were submitted as part of the final phase. 75% of them passed the structural validation, and the issues that failed, you can see what those categories were. There were issues with the pair or the location of service crosswalks. There were some zero-filled date fields, and there were some low population rates and minor code list errors. In most cases, when we got to phase 5, the majority of the issues that failed can be addressed through the override process. There were a few hospitals that that we were considering to be outliers. They had a greater number of validation issues during testing, and we've been working with many of those hospitals directly. And lastly, and Leanne, I believe, is going to get into this as we work through this deck, but we have provided a summary of revisions that we've made to the validations as a result of this final phase of testing. So I think long and the short of it is, again, lots of work from lots of people, and we very much appreciate it. We're very happy at where we're at and look forward to continuing to work with you all in the production site. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leanne.
Thank you, Karen Lee. So for the remainder of the today's webinar, I'll be walking you through just a few more slides before we get right into the demo. The first section is just really about the crosswalks that we've been using for validations. There's 2 different set of crosswalks that we've been asking submitters to send us so we can use on the validation end to better understand the data that are coming in. The first one is the payer crosswalk, which is required. We need this crosswalk to understand the information that is in your payer IDs and payer name fields in your files. And thank you to everyone who sent those in. I think we're doing really well at almost having a comprehensive set from all submitters. And you'll notice this as we get a little deeper into today's webinar that this crosswalk is necessary to pass the validations for some of the payer fields, which I'll get into in a minute. And then the second is the location of service crosswalk. This crosswalk is situational. It's not required from all hospitals or facilities, but it is needed to validate the location of service in outpatient files if you're using that field. And I'll give a little more information in a moment just to make sure everyone is up to speed on where they're at. So the next slide is just a little more detail on the payer crosswalk. This is a required crosswalk to pass validations for the payer fields in both the inpatient and outpatient data files. And we received a number of different crosswalks from facilities. Some hospitals have the same crosswalk for both inpatient and outpatient. Sometimes there's a hospital system and it applies to multiple, and so we can adjust for whatever variation works well for you and your system. But the fields that it is being used to validate against for inpatient are the payer identification number and the payer name, and then for outpatient, as you can see, the OP3004 and 3006. So if you have not submitted your crosswalk but have submitted data, you'll see that you will trigger this validation error for these fields, and the way that you can pass this validation is to get us your crosswalk so we can upload it into a database and actually validate the data coming through on this field. I think we've even noticed that with the Go Live, some facilities who had submitted crosswalks and maybe realized it wasn't an up-to-date one, so they're updating their crosswalks to make sure that it's comprehensive for the new data that are coming in. And we've provided information in both the user manuals and some previous emails about preparing this crosswalk. So if you have looked at those resources and if aren't quite sure on how to prepare your crosswalk, please get in touch with the help desk and we would be more than happy to work with you to get your crosswalk in. So the next crosswalk is the location of service crosswalk. It's situationally required to pass the validation on the location of service field. If you're using this field in your outpatient data, so it's OP4005, we require that you have a crosswalk. This field is being used by facilities who wish to report physician office or clinic data in the same file as facility data, or a say, a separate file with multiple provider-based clinics, and this will then be used to verify which clinics are in the data. We can set up data submissions for hospitals and provider-based clinics a number of different ways, and we just need the facility themselves to get in touch with us if you do not currently have a data stream or your location of service information set up for those provider-based clinics. And again, more information was contained in the user manual about how to prepare these and when it's required. And so if this is something that still you aren't sure if you've done right, please get in touch with us. But this is mostly being used for facilities who are reporting multiple clinics or offices in the same data file. And so we wanted to provide the option of you to do that, so you won't have to submit separate files, but we do need some of the crosswalks and code lists for you to be able to do that. And then I just wanted to take a minute to talk about the requirements of these crosswalks. So as I mentioned, they're being used to validate your files. So your files will fail the related validations if you have not provided these crosswalks. And then we will load those crosswalks once you do provide them and let you know when they're available for validation. So just make sure that once you've submitted them that you hear back that they're properly loaded, and then you'll know that your data will correctly validate against them. And then we just wanted to talk for a minute about the update schedule. These crosswalks aren't necessarily something that we are going to be wanting to update every month. As you know, it's a little bit of work on both sides to be updating these frequently. So we're going to be requiring list updates every 6 months. And when you do provide an updated crosswalk, it will be a full replacement of the previous version. So we realized that in between now and 6 months, we're saying February of 2017, you may have added an additional payer that you'll be sending in your data. We will be adjusting the validation thresholds to allow for some flexibility in some additional payers coming on during the interim period between when you've submitted your crosswalk and when you replace it. So there will be flexibility in the system that won't cause you failures in the meantime when those are a little out of sync, but we're just going to be requiring that you update them every 6 months. And so you'll be hearing more about this as we go along over the next few months leading up to the February replacement. But we just expect to have the initial one now to be working through for validations, and then a completely updated replacement one for both the payer crosswalk and the location of service if you're using that and have made additions to it by February of 2017. And then we'll know that we have the fully updated list at least every 6 months. And from the data user perspective, we don't release the data at this point monthly, so if we're off a little bit as far as what's in your payer fields to what's in the crosswalk, we believe that the 6-month update will provide the information in a timely manner back to the data users as well, and won't be too burdensome for having to replace these files. So the next section I'm going to just spend a moment on there's been some small validation updates after phase 5 testing, mostly adjustments to make some allowances for issues that occur during phase 5 testing. And then it's just one kind of clarification around a validation that there may be a potential future change, but at this point we didn't want to make drastic changes in the behavior of validations after what people got used to in phase 5 testing. So the next slide highlights the handful of validations there were changes to. And so as you can see, the first one, which is the OP 2011 admission or start of care date, there was rules around this field. So there's 2 validation rules that have been removed. We no longer believe that these are necessary to validate the data on that are coming in. It seems like there's also been some past confusion about how these rules are being applied and how the admission or start of care date should appear in the data. So at this time, we're going to remove any validation from that field so we can process your data through and there won't be outstanding issues arising from that. The second one is the valid present on admission, and there's 2 rule IDs associated with this field, and we've added a clause that says when not blank to this validation rule to make it similar to other valid present on admission validations. So we just realized that this one may have been missing the clause when not blank when we are in our validation. So we believe that this will be easier for some of the data submitters to pass this rule now that that clause has been added back in. And so finally, there's a couple of the outpatient service units fields. These fields previously only accepted whole number units, and the fields have now been adjusted to allow for decimal places. We believe that decimal places should occur in these fields, and so now they will be accepted as valid values. And now the last item is a point of clarification on the OP 2014 field, which is the valid type of bill. We had a couple questions from some provider-based clinics that were submitting data and getting validation issues for this rule. Some provider-based clinics use billing practices where professional services are billed on a CMS 1500 and the facility portion is billed on the UB04. This presents a challenge because there's no form locator to store the discharge status on the CMS 1500, and in many cases this is not entered on the UB04. And so one of the provider-based clinics had brought to our attention that they only populate this field when the discharge is somewhere other than home. And so because of MHGO discouraging the use of defaults for submitted data, it is not acceptable to populate these fields being discharged to home, so it's likely that this will be correct most of the time, but we don't want to be populating if it's not real data. And so the guidance at this point, we're not changing the validation, and to stay consistent with Chapter 241, MHGO expects provider-based clinics to report the value contained in the form locator 17 of the UB04. If no value is available, leave the field blank. And per the current validation specification, where more than 5% of the entries are blank, an exemption request will be required. So we just expect, knowing that some of the data, how it's coming out of the provider-based clinics, that for this rule, the type of bill, that an exemption request will probably need to be made probably most of the time for the submission of the valid type of bill. So this is something that we expect. We hope that in the future we may be able to come up with some selection criteria that allows provider-based clinics to not have this validation applied to them, but at this point we're just going to provide some guidance and grant exemption requests, and maybe in the future we'll make a validation adjustment, but just wanted to make anyone aware that's submitting provider-based clinics that we expect that you'll need an override for this validation rule. Okay, so the next portion of the presentation is really just going to be focused on the portal demo. So we're going to go through a number of items in the portal, and you see a list right now on the screen. We're not going to spend too much time on submitting a file since most of you now through all the phases of testing have already done this, but we'll just use this as part of our demo today. Then we're going to look at viewing submission history and the validation results and how to resolve all those pesky validation issues that everyone's been encountering when they're submitting their files, and really talk through how to resolve those issues and requesting exemptions to get hopefully your data into a pass status. And then we'll just spend a few minutes talking about how you update some of the information in contacts and data streams, and then how to access all those help resources that we've started to populate in the portal. So now we're going to move into the live portal.
So Leanne, this is Caroline, before you go there, because this part is so important for people to be able to see, is anybody still having problems getting into the webinar that's on the phone? Okay, great. Take it away.
So here is our welcome screen now that you've logged in. So this is the MHDO Test Hospital that we will be walking through today, and as you can see, there's the welcome and then the notifications. I did want to make mention that we are posting notifications at relative frequency just to provide quick updates on things that we've seen going in the portal or special announcements. So please, every once in a while, make sure you pay attention to the notification screen, because as you can see, we've posted one today. This one is around resolving validation issues, which you're in the right place. This is what we're going to do today. But we just wanted to put a little reminder out that as you're making your first submissions into the portal, that you want to first start by submitting one file for each file type and then work through resolving all the validation issues. Because the great thing is once you've gone through that process, the next time you submit a file of the same file type, all of those overrides will be able to be automatically applied, so you won't have to go through the same activity twice. So we're going to kick it off. We've already logged in. Good thing we've already prepped our file that we need to submit according to the naming conventions that are in the file naming instructions. The file has been encrypted and compressed as well. So we'll go to Submit Data under the Submission menu and select the prepared file for submission. And there you see, submission successful. Next, we can go to the history under the submission menu to see where the file is now. So it's already queued right up in there. So as you can see, it's queued for processing, and we guarantee that all files will be processed within 24 hours, but processing time is typically less than a few hours. And you'll be able to see this file progress through its process. If you suspect that something's taking longer than you typically see it, that's what the help desk is for. But 24 hours is what our guarantee is. So the purpose of this demo, we have processed a file that's already ready in our file history. Here you can see that file ID 1720 is in a failed status and has 81 validation issues. Most of your files will have fewer issues. We're just doing this for demonstration purposes. We noticed that during the testing phase of phase 5 that many of you were able to get the number of issues down to in the single digits. So that's really great. So we're going to click on Details in the Action column to view the summary of the issues in this file. So as you can see, the first set of issues are all of the issue type exemption. We're going to walk through what you do for each of the different issue types, which include exemption, profile, and ad hoc. If there were failure level issues here, those would be issues that you would deal with first. So as you make your first submission to the live portal, as I made mention before, we're going to work through one file type at a time. So let's first try to resolve an exemption level issue by looking at the details. So rule ID 309, so there you go. So here you can see the details of the rule and that none of the patient sex codes provided are valid. So for this rule, it gives the information about the rule, the status, the validation threshold, and the percent passing, which is 0. The summary button brings up a screen that gives a summary of how many of the failing fields are due to a particular value. So we found this little summary pretty handy. So you can see that 50 of the failed values are lowercase b and 50 are uppercase b. So going back, you can also click at the details. So go back and look at your details, and this will give which particular patient control numbers had which particular failing values. So this goes through every one of the patient control numbers. You can click through on the screen. So we've checked our internal database to make sure these values are all we have for patient sex codes. So because this is what we have in our system and we don't have anything else, we are going to request an override for this issue until we can remedy the issue in our system. So to do so, we're going to click Request the Override button. And because this is an exemption level issue, we need to request the override for a particular time period. Usually, the maximum amount of time the overrides are given is a year. But for this issue, we're going to provide the reason for the override and a remediation plan. Note that the time period picked is the data submission period and not the date of which the submission is made. So that's a key thing. So the start date should be the data submission period. This file contains January 2016 data, so I need to make sure my request covers that month. So I'm going to start it in January, end it in June. The reason for the override is our system currently allows for the use of invalid codes, and the remediation plan is a fixes plan for early 2017 to disallow the use of invalid codes. Once I've entered this information and click Submit, MHDO will receive a notification to review the request, and I will receive an email notification once it is approved or denied. So remember, we're on an exemption type issue. These requests go directly to MHDO for review and then approval or denying, and then you'll get an email back with the information provided. So the status will be pending because MHDO hasn't reviewed it yet. Next, I'm going to demonstrate how to resolve a profile level issue. So profile level issues are issues that we don't require MHDO approval for. So we're going to go into the details of this profile level issue. Again, several options for viewing and understanding the failures. To override the issue, I just need to provide a reason for not being able to meet the threshold and needing the override. So our system stores the primary diagnosis in the external cause of injury field. As I mentioned, profile overrides do not require MHDO approval. So when I go back to the list of validation issues for this rule ID 518 is no longer listed as failed. Subsequent failures on the same validation rule will be automatically overridden for the remainder of the calendar year. So I've set this validation up, this override up. It's automatically overridden. So next time I submit an outpatient file, this validation error will not appear again in my list. But we'll have all the information or the metadata stored about why you can't meet the criteria established. So next, we're going to go through an ad hoc level issue. These operate similar to profile level issues in that they do not require MHDO approval. The difference is that the override is only good for the submission period. If the issue occurs again in the next submission, you'll need to override the issue again. So these are things that we don't typically expect you'll need frequent overrides for. It's a flag of things that shouldn't necessarily be occurring in your data, and so you to take note of them, but for this month, we'll let you bypass by giving your reason. We're just going to put the reason in, and then hit the submit. And again, you can look to see that it's overwritten. Now let's go back to the submission history to check on the file we submitted at the start of this demo. So now we can see that it's processed. And what did that take? Maybe 10 minutes? We also have an example of a file which is in the status of passed. So you can see 0 issues, and that's in pass status. And now, the reason we were able to get in this file into a pass status is most likely that it was either the initial submission of an outpatient file, we went through all the validation issues, we trying to think of the right way to say it, they were overridden either by exemption requests or profile overrides, and those had all been passed through the system, and that now changed the status of passed. Again, next time you submit an outpatient file, everything will be automatically applied as you set up your validation overrides the previous submission, and we would expect that there will be fewer and fewer validation issues that are going to occur with future submissions. So we really see that the work is going to be put in on the initial file, making sure that it's meeting the requirements of the MHGO validations in Chapter 241, and then we do think that the amount of work for subsequent submissions is going to decrease drastically. Now, it's important that you keep all the information about your hospital contacts and users up to date within the portal. You will be required to review and update this information on an annual basis, but changes should also be made on an ongoing basis. The summary contains information about your hospital's MPI, tax ID, campuses, and data streams. You can edit some of the information that's already in there. If you have a certain status, if you're an administrator, you can edit some of this information by going to view the details. You can also update some of the information. So for example, on this data stream, this is the main outpatient data stream, and I am missing my vendor information, so that's something that we'd like people to fill in. So some of this information has been populated by us when the system's set up, but there's some information that we would like the data submitters in the hospitals to keep updated. So for example, we would like everyone to populate their vendor information, so it's helpful for us when we are finding issues across hospitals to understand if you have the same vendor or not. And in some instances, we've been working with vendors directly to make sure that they understand and can meet Chapter 241 requirements for file submission. So now if we want to go back, I want to also look at the information for the MPI. So if you look up at the top where the campus details, or, yep, right there, you could go to view details on either of those, and you can update information if you have administrative rights within the system. So administrators can go update any of this information that may have changed. So once the summary information has been updated by the hospital administrator, you can also check to make sure all your data streams are correct, especially if you need to add new provider-based clinics. This is something that you would need to get in touch with MHGO about if any of these data streams seem to be missing or out of date. There's some information, as I showed, that you as the hospital administrator can update, and there's some such as adding new provider-based clinics or data streams as ways to submit your data at MHGO that you will need to get in contact with us about. So if something seems off, let us know. So yeah, I think as I just mentioned, so you can edit information or you can contact us. Let's see. So let's go to the contact screen next. The contact screen contains information about your hospital's contacts. This information will be used to send automatic notification emails and other communications. Not every person listed here will have a user account for the portal. The administrator for your hospital should add or remove people as necessary. And then the user screens, this is who has access at the hospital level. And so this gives all the information about the portal users associated with our hospital and what their roles are, submitter, administrator, or neither. The administrator for your hospital can reset passwords, change a user's permissions, and remove users as necessary. There are several resources available in the portal to help you through the submission process and also go through some of the items that I've just discussed here today. We've been adding things under the help section. The contact information is there. This contains both the help desk information for the portal and the compliance help at the MHDO, which is Kimberly Wayne. And the user manual provides much of the same information that was reviewed during today's demo with step-by-step instructions and screenshots. So that's also up there. And then we've also added an FAQ that summarizes some of the common questions that we received during testing. And so if you do find yourself having a question, you can always check in here, and we'll be updating this as well as we continue to work with hospitals submitting data. But this was updated as of the go-live date of the portal. So if you're unable to find the information you need in either of these resources, again, the help desk is available, and we are just really looking forward to working with the hospitals to get their information in a pass status as soon as we can, because we know there's some deadlines that are quickly approaching for the submission of data. So I'm hoping this little demo of the override process was helpful for you today. Again, there's going to be some time for questions at the end, but I just wanted to touch base about the review of the timeline.
So, Leah, before we go there, this is Karen Lee, can I just make one comment just before I forget? So just for, it'll help all of us. When you go in and you're requesting an override and you're putting in some language around the reason for the override, the more specific that you can be, the better. Because remember, this information is what then gets released with the data that is going out to the users. And so the more specificity that you can provide in terms of why something is like it is, it will minimize us needing to come back to you with questions from the users. And we can certainly talk more about that in the Q&A section, but I wanted to put that out there because, again, we want to make the system flexible, but we also need to make sure we're providing the information about the data to the users. And to underscore, a lot of the users of the data are your facilities. So, it's just important to be as specific as you can.
Thank you, Karen Lee. Yep. So the next, or really the last item before we're going to questions is to talk about the data submission timeline. I know that August is a very busy month, the last one of our short summer here in Maine, and we do have a number of data files due for submission this month. So we really are committed to helping you and working with you to see how we can get files into a pass status for Q3, Q4, and Q1 of 2016. And so we do have the end date for that file submission by the end of August. One thing that you may have noticed, and I guess I didn't, and maybe if we do have time we can jump back in, but in the portal for each of the data submission streams there is a date associated with your file. So inpatient, outpatient, if you have any provider-based clinics, we have entered the date into the system for which data are due because we know that some facilities did get Q3 data in through the database system and some did not. And so we've entered the dates for which, according to our documentation, you had data due for. If you look at those and feel that they're incorrect for any reason, please let us know, but all of those dates are in the system now, so you can refer back to them if you have any questions about which data are missing for your facility or provider-based clinic. So, like I said, if we do have a few minutes, maybe we can jump back into the system. I can show you where that date lives, so you can check it. And then so those data are due in August, and the goal would be to get files submitted and in pass status. Again, start with your say Q3 of 2015, work through an inpatient file, get your overrides in place, get into pass status, and then move on to the next quarters of data. Then next up is the Q2 of 2016. This will get us back into the regular submission deadlines that you are used to, having these due at the end of September. And then the next data period that would be due, it would be Q3 of 2016, which would be due by the end of December. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have an update on all your contact info, any other hospital information you may have in the portal, and also all of your crosswalks that will be happening next February. And then it will be Q4 of 2016 being due in by March of 2017. And so one thing that I mentioned, I know we're in a little bit of a catch-up period right now, and that the quarterly submissions still may make the most sense, but the system is flexible in that we can take monthly or quarterly submissions. We'll just need to develop and understand the pattern for your facility going forward and which submission period to accept. But we are set up that we can take monthly or quarterly submissions. But I think most have been doing the quarters right now because we're in a catch-up period. But if going forward we want to, your facility wants to switch to monthly, we can also accommodate that. So let us know. Okay, well that was really the bulk of the presentation for today. I am glad that we do have some time for questions. You can please, if you want to use the chat feature, we'll be reviewing those and I can kind of walk through anything that's come in. One of the ones that always comes up is, will the presentation be available afterwards? Yes. While we can obviously post the PowerPoint right away, I think probably the recording of the demo will be more useful, and that just takes us about a week to get up because we do closed caption it before it gets posted. So that usually goes up within the week, and we'll let everyone know when that's available. So I haven't seen any questions come through on chat yet, but I guess we can open up the line if people want to ask other questions.
We do have a couple questions that came in through the chat. So the first is just to verify that profile overrides are only good for 1 calendar year, not a year from the date submitted. And that is correct. And then the next question is just around the vendor information. As far as a vendor, are we meaning that a company who creates the files and not the EMR that's being used? And I believe that's correct. Or looking for the name of the company that may create your files prior to submission. And then we just have a request, Leanne, just to review the information you noted before about the dates of the data we're expecting to receive, so we can pull that up.
Okay, great. Yeah, if you could pull that up. I meant to mention that while we were going through. So while Kate's pulling that up, what we can see is that in your summary for your hospital, each of the data streams, so each of the data streams for your hospital will have a start period. So in the example here, the main inpatient the start period is 7/1/2015, so that would be Q3 of 2015. Data would be due for this facility. And so most of them are either 7/1, so starting Q3, or 9/1, which would be Q4. We did have a few facilities that still owed earlier data. There were a couple that have earlier date start dates set. So this is what we'll be using for compliance, just to understand if we have the submissions in that we're expecting. So Kate, if you want to just go back to the summary screen. So scroll down a little bit. So you can see the two submission screens, yep, and then the clinic information, this will all be in the table, the start periods. And if for some reason a hospital or provider-based clinic is closing, there will be an end period set too. Any other questions?
Hi, this is Gail at Acadia. I had actually put in a couple of questions, but it appears maybe you can't see them.
So I can't, Kate's been sending me some. I think there's been one other question, I don't know if this was from you or not, was response times from the help desk.
Yeah, that's fine.
Was that you?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we are hoping is that if it's a quick issue that we can respond to pretty seamlessly, that we would expect a response within a few hours during, the work day. There's a lot of times where the question requires some investigation from our end, and what the expectation should be is that we'll get back to you that we're working on an issue, but it may take a little longer because there may be some different people that we need to involve in answering it, especially now when we're really going through this and dealing with some of these issues. They may be complex for the first time, and we may have to look at different fields that it may take a little longer, but we should at least be acknowledging that we're working on it. But so if you have any issues or questions about response time, please get back in touch. Is there something outstanding that you're waiting on right now?
Yes, I ended up having a structural failure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll get back to you after this webinar.
Okay.
So we've had a couple other questions. What is the reason we use for our payer ID invalid when we override it? If the crosswalks are being worked on, can the issue be overridden until it's resolved? So this is a good question, actually. So if you've submitted a crosswalk but we haven't been able to finalize it yet, can it be overridden in the meantime? I think that, we'll take that question back, and I think we have record. Kate, we have record of who that came in from? Yes. Okay. We'll take that back and follow up with you.
And Leanne, just to clarify for everybody, I think it'd be great if we could put an FAQ in the portal so that, although we'll follow up specifically with the person that's asked this, we'll also make the answers available on the portal.
Yes. Yep. We can add these to the FAQ. And I think in the past, too, when we posted the PowerPoint, we've added the questions that came in to the PowerPoint so that they would have record of them on there as well.
Super.
Okay. Kate, do you have any more? Okay. So we have another one. So there is a structural failure question that I think we need to look into, and we can follow up offline. So there are some questions, I think, coming in that may be pretty specific to a submission, and so we can absolutely follow up with you in dealing with some structural failures. I did notice today that a number of hospitals were having some structural failures, so we will be reaching out and making sure that we can get those worked through so you can get through at least all the other validation issues. And so the one last item, while I'm still, giving a minute for people if they do want to ask questions, just to make the point, I know I haven't maybe said it this webinar, but in previous ones we've discussed that the way that data are handled in this portal is that the issues can be looked at and then either dealt with through a fix to the file and a resubmission or through the override process on a field level basis. There is no editing available in this system, so if there is something in your data that is incorrect that would lead us to not being able to accept it, that is something that will need to be dealt with either through the hospital or if you need to go back to your vendor. Most of the time this really deals with structural level issues that don't allow us to validate the file. If there's particular important fields that have information coming in on them that wouldn't be acceptable, we would expect that that would be fixed in the file and not something that's edited in the system. Any other questions? Okay, Carolee, anything else on your side?
I'm just checking with my team here, and it looks like no. So, Leanne, thank you very much. And again, thanks to everybody that took time out of your day to participate on this call. Don't hesitate to reach out to the help desk or to us here at the Maine Health Data Organization directly if you have any questions or concerns, and we will either answer you directly or get you hooked up with the right person. So thanks again, everybody.